Hello class, welcome to this presentation on refining your presentation. We've covered a lot of the elements, the structure, the research, the preparation for your presentations, but now we're going to add just a few final components and then we'll talk about the last step to preparing before you deliver your first business presentation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Today we're going to be covering hooks, attention getters, your introduction, essentially, and then we'll talk about your closers. How do you wrap up or finish a presentation with a call to action, a recap, and those things? And then third and finally, we'll talk about practice. Now, practice is a really fun topic to talk about, and I think initially you're probably like, oh, okay, whatever. Let me just tell you this. When I have surveyed students in the past, and we evaluate all of their skills, and they report themselves out of visual aids, slide design, vocal delivery, confidence, body language, all of the different elements of a presentation, there has been a major gap in how they self-assess. So let's say their average of all those is a 7. They rate themselves for practice as a 2 or a 3. There's a huge gap there. We'll talk a little bit about why that may be and how we can overcome it and make practice become more effective and efficient for you in delivering a business presentation. Let's start with attention getters and hooks. This is the way that you gain the attention, the engagement of the audience. It's how you immerse them into the topic, into the subject. And there are very different strategies across the board on how to do this. But no matter what, you need to keep in mind what we've been talking about all semester is your brand. A start of a presentation is essentially the same as an introduction to a new person. Malcolm Gladwell in his book Blink talks about this phenomenon that we assess and judge somebody within a blink instant of meeting them. Sometimes it's 3 seconds, but usually our total judgment of that person is pretty solidified after 30 seconds. And so it is with a presentation. If you sit down to watch a presentation, or it's your first day of class and you have a new teacher, and you're not exactly sure what they're about yet, from the very moment they begin speaking to about 30 seconds to a minute, you have a avatar or a caricature or an image of how you think this professor or this class is going to pan out. And usually you will look for information that confirms that bias. And that is because that's what we humans do. It's an energy efficient process. I'm not going to go into the neuroscience of it. But the point is, we have to get our audience to understand right out of the gate that this is going to be valuable to them, that we are credible and are an authority and we're enjoyable to listen to, and that it'll be a fun, engaging, interesting presentation. So again, as you think about your strategic objective, what do you want as a result of this presentation? Who is your audience and how do you want them to feel, that pathos and all of those different variables? You want your attention getter, your hook, to successfully set the stage, to set that expectation with them right out of the gate. So let's talk about a few different ways to do that. First, you want to engage as many of the human senses as possible. The more that you can engage your audience's senses, the more that they will be attentive, the more that they will be engaged, immersed, those types of things. So if you can show them something, if they can feel or touch something, all obviously you hear, can you get them to say something? Can you get them to feel something? The more of these that you can activate, so to speak, in your introduction or in your hook, the more likely your audience will be receptive to the message that you are about to share. And again, you might think, oh, this only applies to like an auditorium of like a motivational speaker or something. No, completely untrue. When you sit down at a business meeting, even if it's just like a weekly report-in meeting, if you can set up a hook that delineates your presentation versus your coworkers, or it differentiates that meeting from other meetings because you're using a hook, it will get your audience, your coworkers, your manager, whoever it is, to be more invested in you. And that's what we want, right? What is our strategic objective? Your hook is going to pull them in and shake them and say, hey, trust me, you're going to want to listen to this, okay? The most common way to do a hook I've seen in presenting is to ask a question. I wouldn't say it's the best because as we talked about all the human senses, really this is only activating two. You're making them think about something and then they're hearing you. And so it's not really the best. I mean, maybe if you had the question put up on a slide that's a little bit more visual, but maybe a picture would be better. Picture, say, 1,000 words, that type of thing. But yeah, asking a question, provoking curiosity or in your audience, that's really effective. We learned last week about that. We learned about how building mystery and building curiosity forces your audience to rely on you for the answer to the question, to the puzzle. So asking a thought-provoking question related to your topic is a great way to do a hook. It's proven, it's tried, it's true. A lot of TED Talks start that way. A lot of business presenters start that way. Even at like tech conferences when they're releasing a new product or software, or Elon's coming out with a new Tesla vehicle or something, they'll often start with some sort of thought-provoking question. How can we advance the human race forward? Or something grand that really pulls a little bit at your pathos while also getting your interest. So that's the question way. Again, for informative, we're not trying to rely so heavily on pathos. So it's more of setting up the objective here. What would it mean if we had this information? If you had this information, how would that benefit you? Maybe you're asking yourself, I don't know how to do this and I want to know how. If you're doing a spatial presentation, basically you're building up the value of the answer. It's a little bit problem solution, which we'll cover in our persuasive topic. But again, we're trying not to be persuasive. We're trying to stay neutral and unbiased. So asking a thought-provoking question may or may not be the way to go with your hook for your informative. But of course, there are great ways to use this approach to a hook. Next is a quote. Quotes are probably the second most common, and they are personally my least favorite. I think when we're doing a hook, it's not just setting up what the content is, but what the audience can expect the interaction between you, the presenter, and them will be. So again, we think about the class that we may have taken where a professor had put, or a teacher had put up a wall of text on a slide, and he forces all the students to read it, or they just read it word for word off of the slide. And you just know that this class is going to be boring and dry and dull for the rest of the semester. We don't want to do that, right? So starting out with a quote, even if it's a great quote, if it's a little lengthy and you're forcing the audience to immediately begin reading, or you read it word for word and then they tune out, it's got to be a pretty knockout quote. The other thing is, a lot of quotes that are used are very cliche. They're overused. I lean away from quotes personally. However, that's just my anecdotal experience. A lot of business presenters use quotes, especially like internally. If a manager is trying to motivate their team and then they're quoting the CEO or the visionary president or whatever, like that's very effective because you're trying to drive culture and different things like that. So there is definitely a place for it. It's just not my favorite personally. One that I like a lot more, because again, it activates way more of the senses, is a participation activity. How many of you have done this? Raise your hand if you've done that. How many of you did this? And what's great about the participation hook is that you can often throw in a little humor there very easily. For example, you could say something like, if I'm doing electric vehicles, you could say, how many of you filled up your gas vehicle and flinched when you saw the number of how much it was going to cost? Raise your hand. And that's a relatable question. It's a human question. And you kind of chuckle like, oh yeah, that pain sucks. I really hate that pain. And then you can say, how many of you had to take public transit and were fearful for your life? Again, like you gotta do a little bit of humor. And I'm leading more into a persuasive presentation versus an informative here. And then you could say, basically, like, how many of you would love to just get in your car every single day, drive to work, drive home, and never have to worry about filling up the gas station? Raise your hands. And then if not everybody raises their hand, you could also say something like, for those of you who aren't raising your hand, who hurt you? Or I don't know, like, so, some sort of silly joke or quip like that. It's just fun. It's a way to get the audience interacting with you, creates more of that human connection. It's a little bit more trust building. It builds your ethos as a character that is a human that they can laugh with and enjoy their company with. And again, you don't even have to go the humor route. You could just say, how many of you own a gas-powered vehicle? How many of you own an electric vehicle? and that you're getting the audience to do something physical, not just think and hear and see, and then they look around. There's this social pressure. There's this social engagement. I'm curious, how many other people do drive EVs? Oh, okay, yeah, I figured that guy did. Oh, you? Wow, that's a surprise. That kind of engagement really, again, immerses your audience into the presentation. So that I like participation or activity ones, or again, it doesn't even have to be raising your hand. It could be stand up. It could be somebody shout out your favorite song from the 80s. You can come up with anything. I really enjoy that. I like setting the expectation that I'm having a conversation with my audience. Hang on. Tangent alert. We need to talk about this because we haven't yet. When you are presenting, you don't want to approach it with this idea of like, oh, I am the authority and I am talking down at you and you just need to listen and receive this information. Even if it's informative, even if you're the CEO talking to the janitorial staff, no, we are not. We never want to be doing that. We are all equals. We are all on the same team. We all want whatever that strategic objective is. It's an exchange of value. So in that regard, we as the audience don't want to be talked down to either, right? No, we want to feel like we are on equal playing field with the people we interact with because we trust those people. We view people as credible. We build that ethos, which is really important. We need to show why we can bring value to our audience. But then we need to set the expectation that we are having a dialogue. We are having a conversation with the audience. Even if they never say a word to you, even if there's no part of the presentation where your audience is actually talking to you, the best way to feel more comfortable presenting, more confident, more authentic, more on brand to who you are, is to not public speak. Have a conversation with your audience. Just have a discussion. It's an audience of your friends and family who have asked you to give an informative presentation. So you're just having an interaction with them. You can ask questions even if they aren't answered. You can tell stories. You can deliver it in the way that you would deliver it, and you don't have to be this stiff, rigid public speaker. So when we're business presenting, especially, people want to do business with people, not robots or companies. They want to do business with people. So if you can connect with your audience and deliver that information in a dialogue, in a conversation, it's easier for you because you do it every single day. You talk to people every single day. But you don't public speak every day. So don't public speak. Just have a dialogue. Just have a conversation with them. Share with them some information. Have a discussion. And you will be better off and they will receive your message a lot better as well. Tangent over. Carrying on. One of my favorite ways is storytelling. I love a good story as a hook. It's pathos building. It evokes an emotion in your audience. It creates an environment. It immerses them. They're visualizing the story. They're relating to your story because that's what we do as humans. And then when you transition into your logos, your logic and data, there's a human connection back to your hook and attention getter. So whether that's a story about the topic or it's a story about how the topic is valuable, or it could be an anecdotal subjective story. Again, generally with informative, we want to lean away from that because we want to be delivering credible authorities and sources who are industry leaders, the experts on this. But if we are presenting on it, we are ourselves also presumably experts to some extent about it. So it would be okay a little bit. But again, just for the sake of this assignment, if you're doing informative, lean away from personal stories because then our bias shows. But you can definitely tell other people's stories, which are also very effective. Love a good story as a hook and attention getter, especially if you can really deliver it with the emotion that you want your audience to mirror you. Remember, we talked about mirroring. Whatever energy you bring to your presentation, your audience will mirror that. And so that a story is a great way to loosen you up. It's easy, it's colloquial, and it's not, you don't have to have it memorized. It's just stories are easy to remember. And then it sets you at ease, it sets the audience at ease, it connects you, you're human to human. It's great. Stories are awesome. All right, moving on to closers. Closers are packaging up the present with a nice little bow on top and then gifting it to your audience, and you want them to take that gift and walk away. And the analogy of that gift are your 3 key takeaways. We talk about rhetorical presenting a lot. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them. This is the part where you tell them what you told them. So you finished your 3 key points and you're recapping the information. You're going to recap those 3 key elements. So at the end of this presentation, quick preview. At the end of this presentation, I have the 3 key takeaways. As I close out this presentation to you, I'm going to say, today we talked about hooks and openers, we talked about closers, and we talked about practice. And you're going to be like, oh yeah, that's what we talked about. Redundancy in business presenting is key. You want to tell them the same information multiple times. It's a memory tool. It's a way to help them walk away knowing exactly what it was, the most important things in your presentation that they should be leaving with. Because, we're going to go back here. Because if you share a bunch of data, if you share a whole litany of information, but you really want them to walk away with these key bits, you need to hand those to them. You need to spoon feed them those 3 key points at the beginning of the presentation, during the presentation, but most importantly, at the very end. You need to spoon feed them like a toddler in a high chair. What did we learn today? We learned hooks, closers, and practice. Like, that's dramatic, I know, but for real, like you need to think about it in that way. Your audience are a bunch of dum-dums who need to hear the same thing multiple times in order to retain it. Because let me tell you, they're going to walk out of the room, their life is going to pick back up, they're going to resume, and then the next day, their manager is going to walk up to your audience member and say, hey, what did you learn from that person's presentation? And one of 2 things will happen. If you give them the recap, the 3 key takeaways, they will tell the boss those 3 key takeaways. They'll say, oh, we talked about hooks and openers, we talked about closers, and we talked about practice. It was a great presentation. He told a hilarious story in the beginning or something, right? Your brand, they'll tell you the reputation, the ethos, pathos, logos, they'll say the reputation that you built with them, and then they'll say those 3 key takeaways. Now, the second thing they'll do is they'll say, oh yeah, we talked, and then they will say a vague general description of your topic and not necessarily your key takeaways. So again, if I'm giving a presentation on space exploration, specifically rockets, observatories, and the LIGO gravitational wave detector, and I don't do my 3 key takeaways, my audience members, when they leave, they might just say, oh yeah, it was a presentation on space. It was really neat. And then I have failed as a presenter because my strategic objective was to have my audience understand what tools we are using to explore space right now to gain better understanding of our universe. And so if they aren't walking away saying observatories, rockets, and LIGO, then I have failed. So I need to spoon feed them those key takeaways at the very end. So recap it. Tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. Spoon feed those 3 key points. And then we're going to transition to our call to action. Oh, there's my 3 key point slide. Sorry, that's the vector for it. Next, we have our call to action. Now, in the informative, this is very basic. It's very simple. You don't want to go overboard with this because it'll make you persuasive and it'll make you biased. And in an informative presentation, it's crucial that you do not come across as biased. So in the call to action, it's very simple. If you would like to know more information, please visit these websites or go speak with me in my office. Or I'll have a Q&A session at the end of my presentation. Please come up and talk to me if you have any further questions. That's it. Nice, clean, simple. Because again, your objective is to inform an audience. You can decide what you're going to inform them with, but more than anything else is you are not invested in what they do with the information. And you say, well, Professor Mace, is that common in the business world? Relatively, no, it's not. I would say that most business presentations are persuasive. However, when you are asked to give an informative presentation, it is crucial. It is incumbent upon you to not have bias because it can make or break you in a career, in an opportunity, and whether you're trusted with other assignments and whatnot. Because the truth is, talking head, tangent time again, here we go. The truth is, we as human beings are extremely it's extremely challenging to not be biased. It's extremely challenging to not want to tell people what they should do, that our ideas are the best ideas. But when you are pitching to a panel of investors, they want to know that you are being objective, that you are being honest about what your sales projections are, about the success potential of your product or service. They want to know what type of competitors are out there. And in a traditional sales pitch, you're going to mitigate your weaknesses and amplify your strengths. But I'm telling you right now, guys, I've been in front of a lot of pitches, and you can just watch Shark Tank. Go on YouTube, watch any Shark Tank. Anytime one of the sharks sniff that the salesperson or the entrepreneur is withholding information, or they're overselling one aspect while trying to hide their weaknesses, the sharks jump on them and then they get out. They're like, oh, you aren't being forthright with me, I'm out. It's weird to think that when you're pitching to investors as an entrepreneur, that you really are doing much more of an informative presentation with, at the very end, you say, can I have $10,000 or $100,000, $500,000? But you really want to approach it that way because they need to know with full transparency what it is you are offering and what the success rate is, all those things. Otherwise, they won't give you the time of day. Another good example is when you are hired as a third party or asked as a third party to do a report on another department. And I think as human beings, we have this tendency to want to protect and shelter other people. We want to like say, hey, you know what, they're really great and they're awesome, which is good. I think we should do that. We should back each other up. However, again, if we are making key decisions based on data, we have to remove the bias. We have to remove that element so we can allocate our resources in the best way. Let me give you an example. Let's say I own a nonprofit organization and I have $100,000 that I can spend to help a disaster that has happened somewhere in the world, okay? And I hire 5 analysts to go and basically help me decide where should I donate this. I said 100, let's say 10 million. This makes more sense. $10 million to help with an environmental crisis. Maybe there's some sort of refugee crisis or something. I need to know where to spend my constituents' donations in the most effective way to help the most amount of people. Well, if my 5 analysts are all persuading me and giving me business presentations that are, you have to invest in this cause, or you have to send all 10 million to this country, or this earthquake just happened, or this tsunami just happened, we have to spend all 10 million on it, I'm going to be so frustrated because I don't need to be sold that those crises are occurring. I need to know how to allocate this 10 million to help as many people as possible because I have limited resources. And really, I would say informative presentation tied to limited resources is a very common business context. So I need my analysts to give me objective data. How many people are impacted by this? How likely is this group to survive for how long if there isn't immediate help? Do I have a little bit of time to get resources from a more affordable so I can help rebuild 10,000 houses? Or do I need to get 1,000 tents on the ground right now that are more expensive? If you can kind of take that analogy and expand on it, it really begins to make a lot of sense. I need an informative, objective report in order to really help the most amount of people. If you are asked by a manager to give a report on your team's performance, that is an informative presentation. You don't want them to feel like you're lying, that you're persuading them one way or the other. And obviously we can sugarcoat things a little bit. We politic a little bit in business. That's part of the unfortunate reality of business. But again, if we are selling like a product to a consumer, and that's kind of how our approach is as we're doing a report, we won't be trusted. We won't be given opportunities. As leaders in the business world, we need to be transparent, unbiased, objective, and then taking responsibility as well is a key thing. Tangent over. That's why informative matters, and that's just scraping the surface. All right. Call to action. It is we're going to talk about the call to action in Persuasive in a future lecture. But basically, the call to action in a persuasive presentation is the action item of your strategic objective. So again, if I'm trying to sell an audience to buy electric vehicles, my call to action at the end would be sign up today for a mailer regarding electric vehicles and get a 20% discount on your first EV. Something like that. But we're not going to worry about that now. We'll talk more about that in the future. Last but not least, you have your parting statement, your final salutation to them, your thank you for coming. And it seems like such an obvious thing to do, but it's also super duper awkward and weird if you don't. Like, could you imagine just doing a call to action like, buy my product? And then you just kind of like walk off the stage, or for more information, go here, without saying goodbye or without saying thank you for coming or something like that. So having at least a, hey, I appreciate you coming out today. I'd love to talk to you afterwards. Thanks so much. That's an important piece that we can't forget. We can't miss out. Fortunately, we're pretty trained to do that. This usually isn't a problem, but you can be strategic with this, and it can add an extra level of strategic objective value as part of your departure. So for example, if you want to build a little bit more ethos at the end, you could say something like, I just want to thank Harry and Sally for inviting me to present on this topic today. They're phenomenal people. They're phenomenal leaders. It truly is a privilege to be here. And a huge thank you to all of you. I really appreciate you coming out and hearing my informative presentation on space exploration. It's always a privilege. I always love doing it. So let's please give you all a round of applause for coming out and making time for this presentation. You are honoring your audience. You are thanking them. It creates more pathos, more connection. So that can be a very powerful way to conclude a presentation. Okay. Section 3, practice. Y'all know who this guy is? Vince Lombardi, football coach, the GOAT, arguably, of football coaches. And he said about practice, I'm sure you've heard the phrase practice makes perfect, and you might have heard his quote. It's funny because I totally ragged on quotes as a way to open a presentation, but here I am doing it. Practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. That's what Vince Lombardi said. And the essence of that quote is you have to know how to practice to really get the most out of practice. Because nobody wants to practice. Nobody wants to spend time, waste time practicing. Let me just tell you, if I could just play the piano like a master without any practice, I would be amazing. Wouldn't we all? It's kind of obvious. But a lot of the reasons why we don't is because we don't like practice. It's usually not fun. But what we can do is we can reduce the amount of time we're practicing, make that practice more effective and more efficient, and then we're going to have a better output at the end. So let's say for this presentation, you have 60 minutes to practice, hypothetically, okay? That's a short amount of time. So what do most people do? They take 60 minutes and they practice their 10-minute presentation 6 times, okay? So that means on your areas that you need to improve on, you spend at most 6 reps. You get 6 reps of practicing that thing, okay? But here's the problem. Let's say you present 10 times and you're great for 8 minutes. The 8 out of the 10 minutes, you've got it down. You've got it, I's are dotted, T's are crossed. You know how to present it with pathos and energy. But there's 2 minutes in there. There's a little bit on key point 2, a little bit on your closing, or a little bit on your intro. There's 2 minutes that you're just a little bit shaky. The problem is, if you just practice 6 times and then record, you only got 6 reps to improve that. And then you spent a whole bunch of time practicing things you didn't really need to. And then you don't even know that you need to improve those areas because you're just kind of winging it. So what if, instead of just practicing your 10-minute presentation 6 times, you record yourself 1 time? You do the whole presentation, beginning to end, 1 time. And then you watch that presentation and you identify those 2 minutes of weak points that you need to improve on. Oh, I'm saying and like and so and I can't really remember. I have to keep clicking the slide and turning and looking at it to be able to remember it. I don't want to do that. I want to smooth out my transitions here. And then I also have my call to action that was a little bit weak. I want to close a little bit stronger, so I'm going to refine that. So then you do that. You say, okay, these specific areas of my presentation are the weakest. Let me polish it. And then instead of spending all that time practicing stuff that you didn't need to, you just refine those specific areas. You break out that 60 minutes into those 3 steps instead. And then if you do the math, you're only spending 12 minutes of meaningful practice if you get 2 minutes practiced 6 times, right? But if you take that 60 minutes and you practice those 2 minutes, you'll get 30 minutes more of practice that's focusing on your weakest points. So it's giving you the greatest return on your practice time. And it's giving you the most benefit, the greatest amount of growth and refinement and improvement on your presentation. So I know it's a little uncomfortable to record yourself and watch yourself. Nobody likes the sound of their own voice, or there's a few of us who do. But I know I don't like listening to my voice when I'm presenting. Like, I watch a recording. I've gotten used to it because I've had to do this a whole ton in my career. But I promise you it is worth it. Not just because it's worth it because you figure out quickly what you need to improve on. You can focus on those areas and you're not wasting time. So do it. Record yourself one time. Bonus. You can test Kaltura. You can test your recording equipment to make sure that it's working. So make sure you do that before. Record yourself, identify your weaknesses, refine those weaknesses, and then practice those weaknesses. You're going to get 30. That's more than double. That is a 100% return on your practice. It is such a better method to improve, and it takes less time. That's how you practice. Okay, I have a few final thoughts on your presentations. Just make sure, again, with informative that you're staying unbiased. That's the key thing. That's the most important thing. Avoid connecting yourself to your message, okay? Outside of your ethos. So you can connect yourself to the message in your intro and in your ethos. I am presenting on space exploration because I am an astronomer and cosmologist, and I've been asked by the University of Arizona to present on this subject. Okay, that is my connection, but that's it. I don't necessarily, for informative, want to bring emotion, because then I will use judgment statements like, space exploration is great, the LIGO detector is awesome, and rockets are fun. Like, no. Data, informative. Spatial, if you're teaching somebody how to do something, you aren't relying on your subjective interpretation of how to do something. If you're teaching me how to ride a bike, I don't want to know how you ride a bike. I want to learn what is the authority, the International Biking Association. How do they say someone should ride a bike? Because that's more trusting to me. That's greater logos for me as your audience member. So don't use your subjective interpretations. Don't use your bias as much as you can. Stay as neutral as possible. And then lastly, make sure to test Kaltura in all of your equipment before Sunday. I repeat, before Sunday. Don't do it. Don't wait till Sunday. I'm warning you. Happens every semester. You wait till Sunday, Murphy comes out. He comes out of the closet like a monster from Monsters, Inc. and just grabs your computer and just breaks your webcam, messes up your mic. Don't let it happen. Test Kaltura the day before at least, maybe hopefully earlier in the week. Record yourself doing your presentation, review it, and I promise when you sit down to do your final recording, it will be much smoother. You'll be way less stressed. You'll be more calm and relaxed and at ease. And you're going to do great, okay? Just focus on the structure, ethos, pathos, logos, tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them, stay neutral, and you will get full points, okay? Deep breath, you got this. I cannot wait to see what you present. So, without further ado, let's wrap up this lecture. We talked about openers, hooks, attention getters. We want to pull our audience in. We want to identify our strategic objective and our brand, and we want the hook to be the vehicle to get the audience on that page, to get the audience interested, engaged, and immersed. We talked about closers. How do you wrap up and conclude and recap a presentation? How do you invite your audience to act on what they've received? And then also a greeting or a salutation, a goodbye, thank you so much for coming, can be very helpful to you. And finally, we talked about practice. What is efficient, effective presenting practice? Record yourself, refine it, and spend all of your practice time on your weakest areas to get the greatest return. With all that being said, good luck. Have fun. This is great practice. When you're choosing a scenario for your presentation, make sure you're projecting yourself into that scenario. If I'm doing space exploration, my scenario isn't me presenting to you, my students. In Marketing 23, I'm not presenting to a class of marketing students. In my scenario, I'm at the University of Arizona. I'm presenting to a whole bunch of other physicists who are interested in astrophysics. And I'm giving that scenario because then it changes your demeanor. It impacts your mindset going into it. And then, students, make sure that you dress for the occasion. Okay. Now, this guy is not professionally business dressed, so he would be not good for that scenario. Okay. Whatever your scenario is, dress appropriate to the scenario. So if I was presenting at a conference, I'd probably wear a blazer with an unbuttoned button-up shirt with some slacks and some nice shoes. That's what I would personally wear. If I was presenting at UVU, at like a TEDx UVU, I would probably just wear a beige or like tan pants with some nice boots, and then I would probably wear a UVU green shirt like this, unbuttoned, sleeves rolled up. So think about that. Think about what your brand is. How can your attire match that brand? And you go all out, guys. This is practice. This is preparation. Everything we do in this class is to get you ready for when you're going to do it in the real world. So make it happen. Can't wait to see it.